In April 1721, Boston is a city holding its breath. The HMS Seahorse has just docked from the West Indies, carrying cargo, news from distant ports, and one sick sailor burning with fever. The harbour master knows the signs. Red pustules, the telltale rash. Smallpox, the speckled monster, has arrived in their wooden city of 11,000 souls. Watch what happens next. Within weeks, this single case will tear Boston apart more violently than any external enemy ever could. Neighbours will turn against neighbours. Mobs will storm through narrow streets with torches. Someone will hurl a bomb through a minister's window. The city will divide into warring camps over a choice more terrifying than the disease itself: die from smallpox naturally, or risk death from an experimental cure learned from an enslaved man. This is the story of America's first medical civil war. Not fought in distant battlefields, but in cramped wooden houses, in church pulpits, and newspaper columns dripping with the fury. A war where parents faced an impossible decision about their healthy children, where science collided with scripture, where a desperate city discovered that sometimes the cure can be more controversial than the disease. Boston in 1721 was about to learn that fighting an invisible enemy is nothing compared to fighting each other. Step into Boston, April 1721. You're standing on a narrow peninsula barely 3 miles long, crammed with wooden houses that lean against each other like conspirators sharing secrets. 11,000 people live here, packed into a maze of winding dirt lanes that follow no plan except the ancient cowpaths they once were. The air carries salt from the harbour, smoke from countless chimneys, and the constant sound of hammers and saws building more houses, more shops, more reasons to crowd together. This is a city built of timber and ambition. 3-story houses with steep roofs and diamond-pane windows line streets so narrow that neighbours can pass. Objects from window to window across the lane. Warehouses bulge with goods from London, the Caribbean, and points beyond. Taverns overflow with sailors, merchants, and craftsmen conducting business over rum and ale. The harbour bristles with masts, sloops, brigs, and the occasional grand ship like the Seahorse, their holds full of the wider world. But Boston's greatest strength is also its greatest vulnerability. The same ships that bring prosperity also bring danger. Bostonians have a term for diseases that arrive by sea: ship fever. They've seen how quickly illness can spread through their wooden city, jumping from house to house like flames in a fire. Walk these streets and you'll hear the Puritan heartbeat that still drives daily life. Church bells mark the hours. Sermons explain everything from storms to crop failures as expressions of God's will. When calamity strikes, and it will, the first question isn't how to stop it, but what sins have brought divine punishment upon the community. The colonists here are proud, pious, and prosperous. They've built something remarkable on this rocky peninsula, but they're about to discover that their crowded wooden city, blessed by commerce and bound by faith, is the perfect trap for an ancient killer that's just sailed into their harbour. The HMS Seahorse sits quarantined at anchor, her sick sailor already moved to the pest house on the islands outside Boston Harbour. The authorities have followed protocol. They've isolated the threat. For 12 days, the city watches and waits, hope battling against experience. Smallpox doesn't announce its presence with cannon fire or trumpet blasts. It creeps. The virus spreads silently during its incubation period, passing from person to person while they feel perfectly healthy. That sailor who was moved to quarantine, he wasn't the only one infected. The dock workers who unloaded his ship, the officials who inspected the cargo, the tavern keeper who served his mates, some of them are already carrying death in their blood, walking Boston's narrow streets like human torches in a powder magazine. Late May brings the first cases among townspeople. A merchant develops a fever. A shopkeeper's wife complains of terrible headaches and vomiting. Then come the pustules, small red spots that appear first on the face and hands, spreading across the body like spilled ink on parchment. Within days, these spots swell into raised bumps filled with thick, infectious pus. The smell is unmistakable, sweet and rotten, the stench of the speckled monster. Boston knows this enemy. Smallpox visited in 1677 and 1689 each time claiming hundreds of lives. But those epidemics struck a generation ago. Many residents have never seen the disease. They lack what doctors call seasoning, the immunity that comes from surviving previous exposure. They're virgin soil for a virus that kills roughly 1 person in 7. It infects. Watch how quickly fear replaces hope on Boston's streets. Families begin hanging red flags or red cloth outside their doors, the signal that smallpox has entered their house. The flags multiply. 1 house, then 3, then an entire lane marked with scarlet warnings. Parents pull their children inside. Shopkeepers eye their customers for signs of fever. The constant flow of people through the city's lanes slows to a trickle. The disease spreads through Boston's wooden arteries like poison through veins. In the North End, where houses press closest together, entire families fall sick simultaneously. The virus jumps from dwelling to dwelling, carried on breath, clothing, and contaminated objects. It shows no respect for wealth or status. Merchants' mansions and craftsmen's cottages alike sprout the red flags of infection. By midsummer, funeral bells toll constantly through the city. At first, each death receives its proper ceremony, but as the toll mounts, authorities order the bells silenced. Their constant ringing spreads. Despair among the sick and grieving. Death carts begin rumbling through the streets at night, collecting bodies for mass burials. The sound of wheels on cobblestone becomes the city's new heartbeat. In the home of Cotton Mather, one of Boston's most prominent and controversial ministers, a conversation that occurred years earlier is about to reshape the city's fate. Mather had asked his enslaved man Onesimus a simple question. Had he ever contracted smallpox? The answer would echo through Boston's streets like a battle cry. Yes and no, Onesimus replied, showing a small scar on his arm. He described a practice from his homeland in Africa, deliberately cutting the skin and introducing pus from a smallpox victim to produce a mild, survivable case that prevented future infection. The procedure had a name: variolation. To Mather, a learned man and fellow of London's Royal Society, this wasn't primitive superstition. It was medical intelligence from a continent that had battled smallpox for centuries. As red flags multiply throughout Boston and the death toll climbs, Mather becomes convinced that Onesimus holds the key to salvation. But convincing Boston's medical establishment proves nearly impossible. 10 doctors practice in the city. 9 refuse to consider the African procedure. They call it dangerous quackery, an untested foreign practice that could spread the very disease it claims to prevent. Only one physician listens: Dr. Zabdiel Boylston. A practical man with a thriving practice, Boylston understands the mathematics of death surrounding him. The natural disease kills approximately 1 person in 7. If variolation could reduce that number, the moral calculation becomes clear. But first, he must prove the procedure works. On June 26, 1721, Boylston takes the most terrifying leap of faith in colonial American medicine. He inoculates his own 6-year-old son Thomas, along with 2 enslaved people in his household, Jackie and Prince. Using a sharp knife, he makes small incisions in their arms and introduces pus taken from an active smallpox pustule. Then he waits. The procedure looks like deliberate murder. Boylston is intentionally infecting healthy people with a disease that has killed hundreds of their neighbors. The thick, yellowish pus carries the living virus. The incision burns and swells. Within days, his patients develop fever, headaches, and the characteristic rash. For several agonizing days, Boylston watches his own child battle the disease he has deliberately introduced. But the gamble works. Thomas develops a mild case, perhaps 20 pustules instead of the hundreds that cover natural smallpox victims. Jackie and Prince also survive with minimal scarring. When word spreads through Boston's streets that Boylston has successfully inoculated his own son, the city's response isn't celebration, it's fury. The opposition forms immediately. James Franklin, publisher of the New England Courant newspaper and brother to young Benjamin Franklin, leads the public assault. His newspaper declares Boylston a dangerous experimenter who threatens public safety. The arguments against inoculation strike deep into Boston's Puritan soul. This is playing God. only divine providence should determine who lives and dies from smallpox. By circumventing God's will, inoculators commit a sin against heaven itself. The medical arguments prove equally fierce. Inoculated patients remain contagious during their mild illness. Critics charge that Boylston is spreading smallpox throughout the city, creating new infection clusters in his reckless pursuit of profit and fame. An untested African procedure, they argue, has no place in civilized Christian society. Dr. Boylston finds himself transformed overnight from respected physician to public enemy. His medical colleagues shun him. Angry crowds gather outside his home. The city selectmen forbid him from continuing inoculations without official permission. Boston has found something more terrifying than smallpox itself: the cure. Boston tears itself apart during the summer of 1721. The city has divided into two armed camps, each convinced the other threatens everything they hold dear. While smallpox continues its relentless harvest in the background, red flags sprouting like poisonous flowers on street after street, the real battle rages in newspapers, pulpits, and public houses over a single, agonizing question. Should healthy people deliberately infect themselves with the disease that's killing their neighbors? The New England Current becomes the voice of rage. James Franklin's printing press churns out essay after essay, attacking Cotton Mather and Zabdiel Boylston as dangerous fanatics who have unleashed hell upon the city. The newspaper's correspondents, writing under pseudonyms like Anti-Inoculator and Philanthrop, accuse the minister and doctor of spreading smallpox for their own twisted purposes. One writer declares that inoculation is a practice that savours more of the Hottentots than of Christians. From Boston's pulpits, the religious war intensifies. Ministers preach competing sermons about God's will and human interference. Mather's supporters argue that inoculation represents divine mercy, a tool God has provided through African wisdom to save his people. The opposition thunders that deliberately inducing smallpox violates the fundamental Christian duty to preserve the life God has given. Increase Mather, Cotton's aged father and Boston's most revered minister, initially opposes his son's crusade, deepening the theological divide. The streets themselves become battlegrounds. Angry crowds surround Boylston's house, shouting threats and demanding he cease his dangerous experiments. The doctor begins travelling with bodyguards and avoiding his usual routes through the city. Patients seeking inoculation must approach his home like conspirators, fearing their neighbours' wrath more than the disease itself. The violence reaches its peak on a November night, when someone hurls a lit explosive device through Cotton Mather's window. The improvised bomb, a grenade filled with powder and shrapnel, fails to detonate properly, but the attached message burns with fury. "Cotton Mather, you dog, damn you. I'll inoculate you with this, with a pox to you." The minister's house could have become his tomb. His family could have burned alive. The attempted assassination shows how completely the city has lost its mind. Parents face the most excruciating choice in colonial American history. Your child is healthy today. Do you let them take their chances with a natural smallpox, knowing that 1 in 7 will die? Or do you bring them to Boylston for the terrifying procedure that looks exactly like murder? Watch a father carry his 10-year-old daughter to the doctor's house while neighbours curse him from their windows. See a mother weep as she signs the consent for inoculation, knowing she's either saving her son's life or ending it with her own signature. The social fabric of Boston unravels. Families split apart when some members choose inoculation while others refuse. Church congregations fracture along inoculation lines. Business partnerships dissolve. Even Boston's selectmen, the city's governing council, cannot reach consensus, alternately forbidding and permitting the procedure as public opinion shifts. The economic warfare proves equally vicious. Anti-inoculation forces organise boycotts against any merchant who supports Boylston or Mather. Shopkeepers post signs declaring their opposition to the dangerous practice. The Courant publishes lists of inoculators like wanted posters, encouraging readers to shun these public menaces. Boston's commercial life, already devastated by the epidemic itself, splinters further as neighbours refuse to conduct business with neighbours. Through it all, the data accumulates. Boylston continues inoculating anyone brave enough to request the procedure, ultimately performing it on 247 people during the epidemic. Each case becomes a test of the competing theories. When natural smallpox kills 844 residents of the 5,759 who contract it naturally, roughly 1 death for every 7 cases, the numbers scream their verdict. Among Boylston's inoculated patients, only 6 die. The mathematics of mercy couldn't be clearer. Inoculation saves lives. But numbers mean nothing to a mob convinced that foreign quackery is destroying their Christian city. The war rages on, fueled by fear, faith, and the terrible knowledge that choosing wrong means watching your children die. You wake before dawn in Boston, August 1721, to the sound that has replaced the rooster's crow, the rumble of death carts collecting bodies from houses marked with red cloth. The air carries the sweet stench of decay mixed with the smoke of burning bedsheets and clothing. This is what remains of your city. Empty lanes, shuttered shops, and the constant weight of knowing that death lives behind every door marked with scarlet warnings. Step outside and count the red flags. On Milk Street, 7 houses in a row display the plague signal. Fish Street looks like a military camp under siege, with guards posted to prevent the sick from wandering and spreading contagion. The North End has become a ghost quarter where entire families have vanished. Some dead, others fled to relatives in distant towns, if those towns would accept them. Commerce has collapsed. The bustling markets that once filled every morning with farmers, fishermen and traders stand nearly empty. Those merchants brave enough to open their shops eye every customer like a potential murderer, watching for the telltale signs: flushed skin, laboured breathing, the slight tremor that precedes the fever. Money changes hands with tongs or sticks to avoid contact. Children no longer play in the streets. Listen to the silence where Boston's heartbeat used to sound. The constant hammering of construction has stopped. Too many carpenters, dead or fled. Ships sit unmanned at the wharves, their crews either sick or refusing to dock in a plague port. Even the taverns, those social anchors of colonial life, serve only a few desperate customers who drink alone at separate tables, studying each other for symptoms. For families trapped behind red flag doors, the world shrinks to a few rooms filled with suffering. Picture the Johnsons on Beacon Street, father, mother, and 3 children all burning with fever simultaneously. The pustules appear first on 8-year-old Martha's face, spreading like spilled oil until her features disappear beneath the swollen, pus-filled bumps. Her skin feels like leather stretched over rocks. She cannot see through her swollen eyelids, cannot drink through her ravaged throat. The smell inside these plague houses defies description. Sweet corruption mixed with the stench of uncontrolled bodily functions. Sheets soaked with pus and blood that cannot be changed because there's no one healthy enough to clean them. The lucky families have one member who remains upright to carry water and broth to the others. The unlucky ones lie together in their own waste, waiting for neighbours to check on them or death to provide relief. Church services, once the social spine of Puritan Boston, occur sporadically when ministers remain healthy enough to preach. Those brave enough to attend sit far apart in pews that once packed together in Christian fellowship. Communion stops entirely. Sharing the cup would spread death along with salvation. Prayer meetings move outdoors where the August heat seems preferable to the risk of infection in closed spaces. The psychological toll matches the physical carnage. Parents watch their children through windows, afraid to let them outside, but equally afraid to keep them confined in houses where the disease might already be lurking. Every cough becomes a death sentence. Every headache signals the beginning of the end. Families debate in whispers whether they should flee to the countryside or remain in the city where doctors might help them. Those who choose flight discover that Boston's reputation has spread throughout Massachusetts. Towns post guards on their roads to turn away anyone from the infected port. Some refugees camp in the woods between settlements, neither welcome in healthy communities nor able to return to their diseased city. They become wanderers in their own colony, carrying bundles of possessions and the constant fear that they might be carrying death itself. The nights bring the worst sounds, children crying for mothers who cannot rise from their sick beds, the delirious ravings of patients burning with fever, calling for water that tastes like metal, food that turns to ash in their mouths. And threading through it all, the steady rumble of wheels on cobblestone as the death carts make their rounds, collecting the day's harvest for burial in mass graves outside the city limits. Boston has become a living laboratory of human misery, where every choice carries mortal consequences and every dawn reveals fresh horrors marked by new red flags on familiar doors. When the epidemic finally burns out in February 1722, Boston emerges from its nightmare with devastating clarity. Of the 5,759 people who contracted natural smallpox, 844 died, exactly one death for every 7 cases. Among Zabdiel Boylston's 247 inoculated patients, only 6 perished. The numbers tell an undeniable story written in blood and courage. The terrifying African procedure that nearly tore the city apart had saved hundreds of lives. The man once hunted by mobs becomes a hero. Boylston travels to London, where the Royal Society celebrates him as a pioneer. Cotton Mather, who risked assassination for championing inoculation, lives to see his vindication. Boston becomes the first city in the Western Hemisphere to prove that humans can fight back against ancient killers, not just with prayer and quarantine, but with knowledge learned from enslaved people who understood what European medicine did not. The scars run deeper than smallpox pustules. Boston has discovered something about itself during those terrible months. When faced with an invisible enemy, the city's greatest threat wasn't the disease. It was the fear, suspicion, and rage that turned neighbours into enemies over competing versions of salvation.